Hello, and welcome to Movement Mentality, the show, where I, Andre Davis, will have a guest or multiple guests on to talk about health, fitness, and the things that they do that are related to that. Hopefully, we'll have some good conversation along the way. I definitely have a lot of people who I enjoy talking to who have a background and that kind of thing, and it certainly helps me to learn things. So enjoy the show. If you want to reach out to me, contact me to be a guest on the show, or if you have suggestions for guests or anything else related to the show, you can contact me on Instagram, Twitter, or on my website. You can see everything that I have going on. So again, thanks for watching and enjoy the show. Hello again, and welcome to Movement Mentality, the show. Today I have Coach Nic Tan on. He is Nic Tan. He's a holistic health coach, and in today's conversation we're going to talk mostly about light and sunlight and artificial light, all those lights. Very interesting stuff. I hadn't known about a lot of the stuff, and he makes it very easy to understand as you go through. If you want to reach out to Nic, he's available on Instagram. You can reach him at Coach Nic Tan. That's CoachNicTan. And he's big on helping increase energy. He's come across his ways of doing it through his own experimentation, which he's found helpful for himself. So if that's something that you want to go down, check him out. And even if it's not something that you want to go down, check him out, because he's an interesting guy and he's got some interesting stuff to share. So with all that said, enjoy the show. Hello, how are you all doing? My name is Andre Davis. I have with me Nic Tan, and this is the show. Well, this is Movement Mentality, the show, the first episode. You may, I don't know, maybe you haven't seen my other podcast, which is called The Other Podcast, but this is my break away from that to get into what I'm also interested in more directly, health, fitness, having the opportunity to bring some people on and have conversations specifically centered around that. So today I'd like to welcome Nic Tan onto the show. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andre. How's it going?
Great. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing pretty well. Yeah, just enjoying a regular day here in Mexico. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm up in Maine. So I see you're in a nice t-shirt, light weather. Is it nice and warm down there, or?
Yeah, it's nice and warm. 365. It's starting to cool down a little bit compared to a few months ago, but it's still pretty hot.
Yeah. We got frost these past couple mornings on the car, so winter is coming for sure. And I don't need it. So.
Maybe it's time to maybe halfway through in a couple of months, you can do a trip south. Get warmed up, feel a bit of vitamin D.
That is an excellent idea. What are you into?
Well, I'm a holistic health coach. So mostly I specialize in helping men and women over the age of 38 improve their energy levels. And I try to do that using light, as we kind of spoke about a little bit briefly. so that basically using light, which is a piece where people tend to kind of miss out on and tend to focus more on like exercising and diet, which is equally as important. But I tend to look at things from not just exercise and diet, but also having a light piece, which is then tied into the circadian rhythm, which then kind of like, it's not just so much of how we do things, but also when we do things that have an impact on our health and wellness. Yeah.
And my understanding of light is not very much, to be completely honest with you. My education goes so far as to know that blue light is bad. You get vitamin D from the sun, and that's it. That's all I got for you, man. And I was playing around with plants for a little bit in time, so I know that you can change growth in plants, which may have something to do with humans, I suppose. It's all life and cells and all of that, by using red lights and green lights at different times. But let's start with the blue light, I guess.
Okay, sure. What would you like to know about blue light?
So my understanding of it and is basically from our cell phones and other electronic devices, like that's emitting blue light. I don't know how that, which is interesting to me because as I was reading more about it, like when I think of blue light, I think of the color blue light. But when I'm looking at those devices, I'm not seeing a blue light. I'm seeing a white screen or whatever. So let's start there. I mean, is that just like a spectrum that's coming off of that?
Yeah, okay. Maybe I could just give a little bit of an introduction, which then kind of, it would kind of tie back into how does blue light actually come about. Light is actually more of like a part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and visible light is just one part of it. And right next to the visible light, you have the ultraviolet light spectrum, which is more of what basically the frequency that we use to generate vitamin D. And then on the other end of the visible light spectrum is infrared light. And then basically from there, you have the colors of rainbow that kind of makes up the visible light spectrum. Yeah. So part of that, from the red to the violet spectrum, you have the blue that's kind of in between. And when we look at basically our mobile phones or even our light bulbs, generally you tend to see things more from a color temperature point of view. So you have more of like the warm color spectrum, and then you have more of like the cool color spectrum. Yeah. So when we actually talk about that, and that's more of like a color temperature, warm generally tends to be more on the redder spectrum of things, whereas the cool color tends to be more on the blue spectrum of things. So even though sometimes when we look at the mobile phone, for example, it tends to be more like really rich in color. And in terms of how our eye perceive things, it can be more like white in color. But in reality, if you were to use a spectrometer to measure things, it's actually blue that really kind of makes things a lot more attractive. And that's what actually gives us a dopamine hit when we look at TVs, we look at TV screens, everything looks really attractive. You have the 4D, 5D type of thing. And, it just makes things really nice to look at. But, that's from an entertainment point of view. But if we were to kind of look at things from a health point of view, these things actually have a biological impact on our circadian rhythm. Yeah.
So like I've got, the hue color lamps, like the bulbs, you can change the colors and stuff. I know I haven't for a while, but I know when I like to just kind of relax or whatever in my room, blue's my favorite color, right? So like I'll put on the blue light and just kind of like chill and do whatever I'm doing with that. Does that have an effect on my body in that sense of the where I'm trying to relax? You're saying that a blue light is more stimulating?
Yes. So let's say let's kind of take a look at things from the sun as an example. So before we kind of had artificial light, which was only 150 years ago, and light bulb was invented by Thomas Edison, right? Like before that, our ancestors basically only had very little blue after the sun sets. The only source of light that we really have for thousands of years before the invention of light bulb is essentially fire, flame, so candles as well. Other than that, it's really more from the moon and the stars, or the occasional lightning. Like coming back to the sun, when the sun basically comes out from the horizon between sunrise or sunset, it tends to have more of like a warmer color temperature, which consists a lot of red, right? That's why when we look at the sunset, it tends to be really beautiful, like red or orange color. Yeah, that's right. So what actually happens is blue tends to be, in terms of like concentration wise, blue tends to be the highest when the sun is kind of like right on top of us, which is also known as like noon, solar noon, right? Basically, that's the time where our eyes, which basically allows us to tell time. Basically, what happens is during solar noon, that's when the blue has the highest concentration, and it basically signals to us that basically it's time to hunt and be alert and to be productive. Okay. What actually happens is closer to sunrise, sunset, when it's more red, it actually tells us that it's either time to wake up or it's time to prepare for rest. So as a result of that and the invention of modern light bulbs, what actually happens is when the sun sets and with a flick of the switch, we can actually turn on our ceiling light, or looking at screens or computer screens, that kind of thing. What actually happens is it actually signals to our eye via the brain that it's actually noontime, rather than it's time for the melatonin to start to produce. And as a result, it's time to kind of rest and go to bed. Yeah. So to kind of answer your question in a rather long-winded way, having blue after dark is actually more of like a circadian mismatch as a result of that. Basically, it's telling us to, hey, it's daytime, let's look for food, or let's be alert, and it's not the time to sleep. And what actually happens in our body is melatonin then stops its secretion, and it doesn't get to the right places. And as a result of that, modern humans tend to basically stay up later and later at night when we should be going to bed in order for us to rest and regenerate.
Nice. So the melatonin, and I'm not very familiar with it, except for like I've got a son who had trouble getting to sleep for a while, and so he was taking melatonin, and I think I tried taking melatonin years and years ago with no result. Like it just didn't do anything for me at the time. But our body, so correct me if I'm wrong, our bodies produce melatonin naturally, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And then so what you're saying with the light in the day with the sun, that moderates kind of 12 o'clock, we're supposed to be active and stuff, the melatonin drops down, and then as that time goes a little bit more, it starts cranking up the production. So by the time the sun comes down, that melatonin is produced enough for us to naturally go to sleep, keep us asleep through the night up until the sun coming up in the morning. Is that accurate?
Yep. Pretty accurate. Yeah. The interesting thing, just to add a little bit to that, melatonin is actually produced in the day, right? And then what happens is in the absence of light, that's where the pineal gland starts to secrete melatonin to the rest of the body in order for us to kind of get into more of like a sleep and regenerative mode. Yeah. What's another interesting thing to kind of note is most people associate melatonin more as a sleep hormone, but it actually does a lot more than that. Of course, it helps us sleep, but what's lesser known is it's actually a very powerful antioxidant that basically allows us to kind of regenerate our cells to turn over so that we can continue to remain young, because it's very important for the cells to continue recycling so that we kind of turn over the poor functioning cells and kind of like regenerate them into healthy cells so that we can continue to stay healthy.
Got it. So I hear antioxidants that helps with like the immune system and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So with that idea of the melatonin being triggered in production by the light, and then dropping, if it's only doing it during the day, if we have, like, I've got artificial lights all over the place and throughout my house, and you work in let's say you're working in an office into 5 o'clock at night. In Maine, at least, it gets dark at about 4 o'clock, so all the lights are on in the office for a good hour, fluorescent lights and stuff. Now, is that kind of light triggering more melatonin production at that point?
No, like melatonin production is actually being produced in the presence of UVA, ultraviolet A. Yeah, vitamin D is more of like ultraviolet B, right? So UVA is always present most of the time, like when the sun is kind of out. Probably at where your current location, when it comes to winter, most likely you're not going to get much of a UVB, but at some point during the day, closer to the noon period, you would still get a little bit of UVA, and that actually helps to basically convert serotonin to melatonin. That's basically how the production chain actually works. And essentially, that's a different pathway altogether. If you were to look at, say, for example, LED lights that we kind of lived under most of the time, right? Or even like fluorescent light. These sort of artificial light sources actually contain a lot more blue as well as green. And those are the color spectrum that helps us save money in terms of energy efficiency. And that's the reason why, like as modern humans, as we go along, like the whole idea of basically having energy efficiency becomes a very important thing for the environment. But at what expense? The expense is actually at our health as a result of having too much blue. And perhaps I could share a little bit with you on how does light actually trigger a biological response in our body. It's actually a very simple pathway, and basically the eyes would actually register the type of light information, and it actually goes from the eye to the this part of our brain in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay, that's actually more of like the master clock that basically dictates and instructs the rest of our body on what time of the day it is based on the light information that was registered in the eye. And that basically tells us what the body should be doing. Should it be resting under the absence of light, or should it be kind of active, or even be alert, or even say improve your blood pressure so that you can move a lot more efficiently during the daytime. Perhaps you need to do a bit of hunting for food in the afternoon, or even digestion, right? For example, our stomach acid is usually the strongest earlier in the morning, so that allows us to eat a big breakfast and be able to digest food really well. These are all like different mechanisms of the circadian rhythm, and basically these things are all controlled by light, and that's why light is so important. Yeah.
Nice. So that's interesting with the circadian rhythm and how your body kind of works with that. I know it exists. That's about it. And you gave a good explanation of like your stomach, the acids, being ready to break down more food in the morning through big breakfast and all of that. I just read something, an article just before we got on. I think I shared it with you about daylight savings time in general, and how apparently in the US there was something last year. No, last year in 2021 that there was talk of stopping daylight savings time, where this next one coming up or the one next spring would be the last one. The one next spring would be the last one, but it hasn't gone to Congress to be discussed and like fallen through with. I know. How do you feel about daylight savings time and the rhythm? Like, how does that affect, in your opinion?
Oh yeah, it's actually pretty huge because like looking at looking back at our ancestors, right? Basically, the only way that they can really tell time, which is consistent, is when the sun rises and when the sun sets. Even before, like let's say for example, we have a clock, for example. So basically, that's how our ancestors used to tell time. But what actually happens is when you actually have a daylight savings mechanism in place, basically you're kind of, and we're all modern humans, we have to go to work, right? We have appointments, we have to basically do coaching, that kind of thing. We basically then becomes more of like a mismatch between the time and the obligations that we have in order to kind of live our life versus living our life with the rise and the fall of the sun. So there was actually a study that there was an increase of heart attacks by almost 24% during the change, during the shift of daylight savings during spring. Yeah, so that's actually pretty huge if you think about it. And part of the reason why that would be the case is because, once again, looking at circadian rhythm, and for example, let's say how and when your blood pressure is supposed to be supposed to kind of like become the highest. These things start to have an impact when you basically shift the time that you actually have to wake up to go to work, for example. And that's basically a mismatch because the time that you have to wake up is no longer determined by the sun, but rather by the time or the clock on our iPhone, for example.
Oh. So yeah, it turns into a completely artificial thing.
Yeah.
I'm from, because I know personally, I never really thought of it until I came across you and we got to know each other a little bit. Where did you start?
Okay, I guess it began when I was trying to overcome my own health issues. I used to be a night owl. Before I became a health coach, basically I was working in Singapore as a commodity trader for more than a decade, basically. So I was a night owl, and it got to a point where before I basically had to deal with burnout and I completely crashed. What actually led up to it was my lifestyle. And part of the reason why I was a night owl was because I wasn't able to go to bed. And I would have to work at like 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 3 in the morning, I would still be wide awake, lying in bed, struggling to go to sleep. I've tried melatonin, I've tried all kinds of various, methods of falling asleep naturally, and supplementation, even various sleep aids. It tends to work past a certain point and then basically plateaus, or it comes with side effects such as grogginess, brain fog, difficulty falling asleep. I wasn't able to find something that sticks, that basically that allows me to basically have a long-term sustainable solution. So one thing led to another. I eventually crashed, and I had to deal with fatigue, burnout, had a sluggish metabolism, and nobody had any answer for me, not even doctors or functional doctors, other than supplementation. So one thing led to another, and I happened to come across this neurosurgeon who basically started talking a lot about circadian rhythm, and obviously being really foreign to things, like being really new to things, like what's the circadian rhythm thing? How on earth does light have an impact on health? I'm pretty sure majority of the population will be wondering about this. Yeah? So one thing led to another, and I couldn't really kind of ignore it because circadian rhythm was something that won a Nobel Prize in 2017. So it can't be a scam, right? It's just kind of how do we kind of understand that and apply things to my life? And one of the things that basically came about as a recommendation was if you were to kind of block blue light from your eye or even just protect it, right? Chances are your body will start to generate melatonin and you will be able to sleep a lot quicker. So I figured, okay, like if that's the case, let's do an experiment on myself, like, true biohacking fashion. So I bought a pair of really cheap UVEX goggles that basically blocks the blue light. So basically, when the sun went down, I bought it from Amazon, and when it first arrived, I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. Like very low risk type of experiment. And I put it on, and that was like maybe 8:39 at night. I was watching TV, and my eyes started tearing. And by like 9:45, I was like, I'm so tired, I had to go to bed. My wife was like really shocked. So that was when the first time I actually noticed that, wow, there was actually a huge biological effect on me anyway. So that was kind of like interesting. And to kind of pair things up, like if you want to kind of like block artificial light at night, right, in order to protect your circadian rhythm, what should you be doing in the morning? Like you should be getting more sun exposure, right? So I started experimenting with that, just allocating maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes of my time, just going outside, doing my meditation outdoors or even going for morning walks. And I used to be a coffee addict. And that was probably one of the reasons how it led to my burnout as well. Too much coffee, high cortisol, and it just goes on an overdrive. So one of my doctors told me, hey, you need to ease off on coffee. And like, I wasn't really handling that really well because I couldn't deal with my brain fog, my energy levels. And the moment that I blocked blue light at night and then started going out and really allow my eyes and, here I am. And that's what I'm really using light to kind of teach people who has the same problems that I used to have, mainly insomnia, energy problems, and try to improve their life like how I improved mine.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, especially from that, I like that approach of really testing it out yourself, trying something new and going with it and finding what worked. That's a great approach to go. So you've been helping other people with this for how long now?
About 1.5 years now. Yeah. So like there can be, and it's all age group, and it's really quite surprising that some of the people that I've helped, like in their late 20s, they're starting to have problems falling asleep, and one of the common questions that I would ask them is, what are you doing? What are you doing just before you go to bed? And majority of them that have problem falling asleep is, I'm on my phone, either watching YouTube, Netflix, you name it, right? Social media, scrolling. And the very moment that I tell them, hey, you don't need to have like a pair of goggles to protect your eyes. If you really want to overcome this, just do an experiment. Don't look at your phone an hour before you go to bed and see if you can sleep better. And most of the time, when they do this really free experiment, they come back the following day and, hey, I could fall asleep. I no longer have to stay up till 3 a.m. before I go to bed. I tried at 11 and 11:30 I'm out. So that goes to show that it has an effect on most people, or so far with most people that I coach, as long as they're willing to try the experiment out themselves. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's all great stuff. One quick question, one final question I have, and only because it's a personal thing for me. I have a Kindle, and I always in my head, I'm like, I want to read before I go to bed. Do I read on my Kindle or no? Is that emitting that blue light as well?
Kindle is actually not as bad as the iPad, but it would still have a fair amount of artificial light. I haven't actually tested a Kindle myself, but I have a spectrometer that I basically test things out. Ideally, really the most optimum thing is just to make sure that your screens are red. Those are more of the advanced stuff that I get into. Otherwise, one of the things that you could do is to basically invest in a cheap pair of like blue light filtered glasses. So when you put these on, and then if you were to read, then that way at least you're still protecting your circadian rhythm and you're still allowing melatonin to be released from your pineal gland. So that's not just going to help you sleep or go to bed, but it's also going to improve the quality of your sleep while you're asleep. So one of the ways whereby you can tell without really having any sort of like fitness trackers, right? Is you can observe the quality of the sleep by two things. Number one is, do you remember your dreams at night? Because you need to kind of, in order for you to dream, your melatonin needs to be rather optimized, yeah? And how many times do you wake up in the night? Yeah. Let's say, for example, if some of the people that I coach, they wake up like 10 times a night. Something is not right. Yeah. So like you really like to bring that level down to like maybe 1 or 2 times a night. And then the third thing is when you wake up at night, when you wake up the following day, one really good telltale sign is how do you feel? Do you feel refreshed, full of energy, or do you feel like you could sleep even more? So those are the things that you could really listen to your body and get clues on the quality of your sleep. And protecting your eyes from blue light, whether is it from the phone or the Kindle, would be the number one step in order to kind of get your circadian rhythm in place after dark.
That's some really good advice, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's anybody watching this can, I know I certainly took away quite a bit of information here, helpful. And I definitely want, but yeah, so where can people find you in your coaching? How can they get a hold of you?
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, they can follow me on Instagram at Coach Nic Tan, NICTAN. So like I usually post like different topics on health, you know, on EMF, on light, even movement, nutrition. They're all important, and I try to basically cover things from a very holistic angle with an emphasis on light. Yeah, like just reach out to me over there, and I'll be more than happy to help with anything or answer any questions.
That's awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Nick, for coming on. My #1 episode right here, talking about light. And like I said, well, I hope to have you on again sometime. We'll definitely have to connect and do it again. So I'm Andre Davis. This has been Nic Tan, and have a good one. I should have a catchy like exit thing to say. I'm gonna have to work on that.
Show #2.